By the way, given your experience, what do you think, hypothetically, if they stop here tomorrow, hypothetically, they're heading there, invading Latvia or Estonia, some small countries, will they stop at all that?
Maybe, but probably not. First and foremost, their goal is the restoration of the Soviet Union, at least the European part. Well, Asia will likely automatically fall under this Soviet Union, version 2.0. Next comes Poland, Finland. Honestly, that's the Russian Empire, the restoration of the Russian Empire. And then there's the direct border with Germany. Our grandfathers fought there, we need to repeat that. And then there's France. This is unfolding exactly as another historical figure named Stalin had planned.
In the end, Russian soldiers will stop wherever they're stopped.
Russian soldiers will stop where Russian soldiers get their asses kicked.
Why do they have this mindset that they need to expand, that they need to conquer? The world has supposedly become civilized. Fukuyama wrote back in the day that this is the end of history. Nothing interesting will happen anymore because there's enough food, there's enough space for everyone. So there's no point in fighting.
I can only voice my opinion that their president wanted to go down in history as Vladimir the Land Gatherer. That is, he has a lot of money and he's no longer interested in it, but to go down in history as Vladimir the Great #2 or even Vladimir the Great #1. That explains why this propaganda has been going on for 20 to 30 years. For example, the story with Crimea didn't start in 2014, but practically immediately after the collapse of the USSR, back in 1991, they started throwing this at us. In general, if you watch their TV, it seems like Russia is surrounded by enemies they have to destroy. That's why there's only one way to protect ourselves from this. The only way is to prepare a response. Well, now there's no need to prepare it anymore. We have to fight to the end, and perhaps it will end the way it should have in 1991.
By the way, speaking of Russian propaganda, here's an interesting point. Our NGO researches digital platforms in European countries, and there are many sites there that spread Russian propaganda and Russian narratives. And when we go to different countries and say, look, you have this site here, it spreads Russian propaganda, Russian disinformation, like, why aren't you doing anything about it? Why aren't you blocking it? And they look at it and say, well, first of all, we have freedom of speech, and this is an alternative point of view. And second, they say they aren't at war with Russia, so they can't react that way. To which I always explain, you may think you aren't at war with Russia, but you are at war with Russia from the Russians' perspective, because they have Gerasimov's doctrine on hybrid warfare, and according to it, they're already at war with Europe.
Unfortunately, Europeans don't understand this. America is far away, across the ocean. Trying to send troops there is a bad idea, but Europe isn't like that. Europe is right here, just a stone's throw away.
What do you think, if the Russians managed to quickly capture Ukraine, what would happen next? Wouldn't it be the case that Ukrainians would then join the ranks of the Russian or some Soviet army and go fight in other countries?
That's exactly what they told us in the spring of 2022, when we were already in the Bryansk region, in Novozybkov, in Pretrial Detention Center #2. They told us that they would quickly take Ukraine, and then we, as Ukrainian prisoners of war, would be sent to fight in Poland. And this is exactly what we are seeing now. The male population is being mobilized from the occupied territories and thrown into suicide assaults on Ukrainian armed forces positions. This is exactly what people need to understand, those who are currently, for example, fleeing the recruiters, that if, God forbid, the Russian army comes to your hypothetical town, they will round you up, your children, your husbands, and throw you against the Ukrainian armed forces, against Europe in the front lines. It's just that 4 years ago they weren't hiding those plans. So understand this correctly, that's the problem.
Well, after all, we've already been through this in history, so to speak. In 1917 to 1921, when the Bolsheviks seized Ukraine, yes, over the course of a few years, and then there was the Holodomor, and then those same Ukrainians were fighting in the ranks of the Soviet army. And yes, you could even argue that Hitler was the first to start it, not Stalin, because in reality, both of them had invasion plans. So yes, we need to do our homework and study history lessons.
Unfortunately, people know that you have to study math in school and physics too, but I see that history is what needs to be studied. The other problem is that we don't know how to teach history here, but without knowing history, you'll end up back in 1918, just as we have now, but 100 years later. And it's possible that in another 100 years it will happen all over again. And again, either war or the Holodomor or both.
Well, let's hope that this cycle ends not with our downfall, but with the downfall of that colossus with feet of clay. At least that's what the evidence suggests. There are so many such indicators right now. And even the Russian war bloggers themselves, they're all complaining, shouting. Russian business people are complaining. Everyone is suffering. Well, no one dares to say, so what's the reason? Why are they complaining? Why are they suffering? Okay, let's get back to the topic of prisons. In the civilized world, especially if we look at Nordic countries like Norway, Sweden, and so on, the prison system is designed so that a person can come to terms with their offense and accordingly change their behavior in the future. What, in your opinion, is the Russian system focused on?
Well, as far as Ukrainian prisoners of war are concerned, it is geared, in my view, toward the following things. First, even when you return home to Ukraine, you will no longer serve in the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine or the National Guard. That is, you will not serve, you won't fight. And they forced us to sign documents stating that we would never again take up arms against the Russian Federation or the Russian Federation's army. In other words, conditions were created so that a person would never want to end up in Russian captivity, in a Russian prison, despite the fact that there is some Geneva Convention there. It doesn't exist in the Russian Federation. The same goes for civilians, so that, God forbid, you wouldn't want to fight against the Russian army, so as not to end up in that prison again. Our fault is that we are Ukrainians. Even though I'm a Ukrainian Tatar, I'm an enemy to them. But you just have to realize this. Anyone, even Europeans, understand this. You are second-tier enemies to them, or even third-tier.
There is a view that some countries in Europe are trying to maintain good relations with Russia. Do you think they will be able to get preferential treatment?
Only the leadership, perhaps, will receive preferential treatment. And when the Russian army arrives there, it's just a lottery. You'll either get lucky or you won't, and you'll be there screaming and shouting that you were pro-Russian, but that doesn't guarantee they'll even let you leave. You might end up either rebuilding something or sitting in prison or marching into a neighboring country under the flag of the Russian Federation. You have to realize that. You no longer belong to yourself. You'll do whatever you're told, whether you're free or in prison.
And by then it'll be too late.
By then it'll be too late.
What was your hardest day?
November 10th to 11th, 2024. When they were beating me, I didn't understand why. Okay, they beat me up there, but I knew that tomorrow would be the 12th. And they told me, we'll come for you again tomorrow. I knew that only my left leg had been injured, and tomorrow they'd break my right one, and I wouldn't even be able to crawl. And that was the hardest part, because I didn't understand what I was doing wrong or how it would all end. That was the hardest part, but after 3 days, things somehow calmed down.
Why do you think Russia actually started this war?
They started this war because their supreme commander said go. And here, you just have to understand. Why did he say go? In reality, the Russians don't really care at all. I spoke with those who carried out the mop-up operations. They were completely reasonable. Yes, they came under contract to kill us, but they didn't derive any pleasure from it, for example. They're doing their job. Why? Because they were told to. Who told them? Their commanders. Who told the commanders? Well, their boss. But the main thing is, I'm saying that he wants to go down in history, in my opinion. He wants to go down in history like Vladimir the Great.
Well, for now, he's going down in our history as...
With the letter D, don't think it stands for darling.
Like Vladimir the Dickhead, and that's how he'll remain in our history. How do you think this war should end?
With a victory. Our victory.
What does our victory mean to you?
Restoring Ukraine's territorial integrity, reclaiming the occupied territories, and rebuilding at the aggressor's expense. That's the first part. The second part is the elimination of the potential threat from the Russian Federation. This might mean disintegration, collapse. 20 independent states will emerge there, which will no longer try to rebuild some kind of empire. They will simply live for their people. Not for some grand dream, but simply so that people can live normally there. Because you see, here we are holed up in the basement of the Gostomel airport. We have construction workers there, well, civilians. And they tell me, a Russian soldier comes in, looks at our renovation. Just a typical new prefab building, a cheap one. And he's like, wow, it's so nice here, so beautiful. And well, that construction worker think, my God, this is so primitive, it's just so shabby here. Well, we just took some tiles, some ceramic tiles, put them up here and there, painted the ceilings, we laid the cheapest laminate flooring. It's just some budget economy setup there, you know, the simplest possible. But for the Russians, it's wow. That's what Russia, or rather what's left of it, should be like, so that their own people can live there. Because those soldiers were surprised, like, how is it possible that these Ukrainian villages have gas and asphalt? They were driving through the Kiev region from the north to us, well, to Bucha and Gostomel. So they were saying among themselves that these villages have both gas heating and paved roads. I mean, well, for all those so-called Mordovians and Udmurts, maybe it's finally time to live for their own people and not for some stooped dream. an unattainable one.
Well, and in the end, there's all of Great Russia, so-called. I mean, they come, they're surprised that we live better, given the amount of resources they have. Just take care of your own country. Or better yet, the many countries that can form and live peacefully on this planet. Serhii, thank you for taking the time to come. I hope that the worst is behind us and that only victory lies ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for supporting our project. We'd appreciate your feedback, so please write in the comments what impressed you the most and what interested you so we can use these for our future conversations.